Oh, yeah.
All right. So welcome to our first Hangout on Air. My name is Michael Costco.
Hey, I'm Luella Smith Barnett.
And I am Tracy Barrientos.
Great. So we read the first couple chapters of problem-based learning, and what were some of the big takeaways that you guys got out of the book?
I
I
highlighted a
should
lot
say
of
the book
things.
so far.
Yeah. The big one from chapter 1 was just the very last line that really just kind of summarized it for me. Um, the nature of PBL means that we have to have the right kind of classroom environment, establish a classroom environment that's welcoming questioning and points of view. So that safe environment where kids can feel free and safe to collaborate with each other and express their points of view and their ideas, right?
Yeah.
So that was my really big takeaway.
Yeah.
How about you guys?
I definitely agree with that. And one thing that I got from kind of that same part was talking about just what PBL is with that, especially with their inquiry approach that they're pushing in the book, and that how often I've seen PBL just described as something a lot different from what they're going for in the book. Like, for example, people will have their students do a project, and they'll be like, oh, this is PBL. Yeah, you had them do a project, but it really didn't have that inquiry approach. And one thing that I took out of it was if we look at page 8, where they gave all the different examples of different PBL projects, and every single one, the teacher is asking the student to take on a new identity or take on the role of a historian or a scientist or a mathematician. And I think that has like a really strong, it's a really strong part of what true PBL from this inquiry approach is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I got out of and I agree with both of you, definitely. When I think of PBL, I think of real life problems. And when I look at page 5, it talked about, educating students to be investigators, to take real world problems and think about solutions to those problems.
Mm-hmm.
And many times they don't necessarily know how, or teachers don't know how to engage students in that type of, rigorous activity. So, but getting students to identify those problems, asking probing questions, conducting rigorous investigations aimed at finding answers and solutions to those problems. And a lot of times that's very powerful, especially when the problem is relative to the student.
Right.
Or to society. So this is just, a real life skill especially for the 21st century.
Right.
Then the other thing was the strategies that it gives, and one that I looked at that I would like to start using is the KWHLAQ. So it's just another form of the KWL, but it asks more questions and it allows the students to also apply what they're learning.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the fact that it gives strategies to start students.
Can I add to that, Lou? I mean, I totally agree with you saying. I really did like that, how the KWL was expanded.
Mm-hmm.
I almost thought like maybe that was the original form and people just kind of shortened it as they went along and thus lost like the original purpose of it. So it's got the H for how, right?
Yes. Yes,
and
it's the K, W for apply. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm.
The A for apply, and then the Q at the end, I thought was like when I read that, I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I've really been needing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've all used KWL, but like this one really seemed to help us get a little bit deeper, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, that A and Q is so effective because it gets students to really think about how will we apply what we've learned to our real lives and to other subjects.
Right.
And then also thinking about the next projects, because it says, how can you apply this to the next project? And then getting them to think about what new questions do we have following this inquiry. So I really like that. But it did say it derived from the KWL. So But I
Okay.
agree with you, Tracy. It seems like that's the more logical.
But isn't that always how it works though? Is that like just like look at STEM, like STEM becomes STEAM, and then we
Yeah.
decided that we left out languages, so now it becomes like STEAML or we're always as teachers we're always copying and improving and editing other people's work. But
Yeah.
I want to go back to something that you first said about the problem solving. Which I think is really important. One thing that when you were talking came to mind is I'm not sure if you guys went to Google Palooza this summer, but
I missed.
I missed it.
oh, it was so great. But Jamie Casa,
Good meeting.
he's Google's education evangelist. He was one of the keynote speakers, and I've seen him speak before, and he's just great. But his sentence is that we should stop asking, or his charge, I should say, is that we should stop asking kids what they want to be when they grow up and really start asking them what problems they want to solve, and just seeing about how that changes the conversation around,
Yeah.
with schooling and setting goals and opening up students to multiple pathways and really getting them to start analyzing what they want to do with their lives from that problem approach. And the text goes in a little bit deeper with it. On page 5, just before it gets to the end of the section, it says, if we fail to educate for inquiry, problem solving, critical creative thinking, and reflection, our ways of life will surely be in peril. Which I think is a very fire and brimstone way of addressing it. But I mean, there is some truth there.
That is. That is.
I agree.
So, and they asked some questions like, why do you, and I think we would just pretty answer that, the books, and I like the fact that the books makes us stop and think with the little timer. What do you think PBL is? I mean, why do you think PBL is so important in today's educational setting? And I think we pretty much just, hit on why, because we want our students to be proactive. We want them to be active learners in their, not just in school, but in real life. We want them to be active participants in society and help solve real world problems that affect not just them, but the society as a whole. That's what the STEM lab is all about. We talk about, that's what STEM is all about, innovation, creation, designing. You're solving problems, everyday problems.
And from a multidisciplinary approach.
Yes, exactly.
Like what we all. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it's interesting because, thinking about that question, I had an interesting conversation with a fellow teacher when I was reading this chapter. And one of the things we thought about too was just that it is so challenging to engage students the higher up they go in the grade levels. So like when you think about the primary grades, that's really, it seems to be, these are some of the strategies that teachers already use. They often do pose problems, and it is very cross-curricular. And the kids really are motivated and enthusiastic about solving these different problems posed, right? And then something happens like right along, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, and suddenly, I teach 7th grade, and I have taught 7th grade for a while, but like suddenly, like, you kind of have these students sitting before you that are really kind of passive learners, kind of waiting, right, for somebody to light the fire. And so, yeah, what you're saying, I mean, we need a STEM lab in our school, but
I think
what I really like about this is that to me is what's so important, is it gets back to the basics of what really works to motivate students, right? Real problem.
You said that something happens. I think we know what that is that as students get closer to 6th, 7th grade, is that we have more emphasis on their testing.
Yeah.
Especially in the city, they're going to be looking at your test scores to decide which selected enrollment school you're going to be going to. In high school, it's preparing for the ACT, now SAT, and that just, how do you balance, developing students that are able to solve problems and test prep, which kind of requires students to be in a more passive position.
Right. Right.
Exactly. So students, especially, and not only that, as students get higher up, they're asked to process information at a higher level, and they're asked to think critically and research and when you think about all of the types of research papers that they will have to do at higher levels, the different types of writing, even when they get ready to go to some high schools, they have to write essays. They have to write about how they can approach a problem and what they would do to solve a problem in certain hypothetical situations, or not even necessarily, well, hypothetical situation, but placing themselves in a real world situation. And then especially for college, what would you do? Create what scenario could you, help solve a problem in? And then they have to do community service, which is identifying a problem as well. But in terms of of education in the classroom, when we talk about the elements of PBL, because the book also talks about the elements of PBL, starting with a problem statement. And it gives an example of you're a paleontologist or is responsible for. So I think that's important too. I think you mentioned that, Tracy. One of you mentioned it just a few minutes ago about taking on the role of a worker, of somebody in a field that has a problem to solve, which is true, which is real. Everybody has some type of problem that they have to give answers to or solutions to. Ours is helping students learn. How do we help students learn? And
we don't stop at just like one thing. We keep going, and kind of reminds me of back at our first MSU experience. I think it was the first one in July. At some point we went through like the what if, and so those two phrases really like open up a lot for me. So and so do you remember that one where we did like the different so
yeah,
and so the PBL is really to analyze different solutions, because maybe there's not just one solution, maybe there's multiple solutions, right?
And that's a good strategy for helping students break down that wall of insecurity, when it comes to inquiry-based learning and problem-based learning, are those types of activities, like what do we call it? The stand-up comedy? I can't think of the name.
Second City.
City strategies like the one you just mentioned. And then another strategy from the Kagan strategies, which are cooperative learning strategies that help students. It's good for team building, and it's good for classroom building and icebreakers and things like that. So there's a lot of students, they're not very comfortable with inquiry-based learning.
Right.
They're so used to giving instructions, just here, step by step.
But also inquiry, like going back to the identity, inquiry looks different for different fields. So an engineering inquiry process is going to look very different from a historical writing inquiry process or a writing inquiry process. And I think that's where it comes from, we'll get into this a little bit in chapter 2, but just modeling. So that teacher, if you're going to do this, you can't just assume that like, oh, I know that they do inquiry in science, I have the math, we should have no problem. But what does that actually look like for your field and for that identity of someone that's in that field?
Right. So true.
And I keep on coming back to that identity thing comment, because it was kind of one of those aha moments for me when I was reading that part and I made that connection, because just looking and having looking through tweets and talking to teachers I know in the district, talking about how they're really diving into PBL and they love it, and they're explaining their projects, and they're like, okay, so my students, for example, one teacher said that they're covering the parts of the cell so that he had his students write a children's book. And I'm like, and he's like, it's like PBL is so great, but I'm like, you had them do a project, but is that really PBL? Like, they were regurgitating the information in a different format, but it didn't have any of that inquiry process. They didn't take on the role of a scientist, so to speak. And it's really awkward to be put in that situation where you're like, that sounds like a great project. We're really here, you really need to read this book.
Right.
Well, that was one of my ahas too, is just like project-based learning is very different from problem-based learning.
Right.
Because I
Exactly.
know when we first started looking up, just different information resources, like project pops up the most,
Mhm.
but the project could be part of the problem solving,
Right.
but this really is looking at, authentic problems that we can really,
Mhm.
put the students in that role to solve them. So,
Yeah. Like developing a weather program to report the weather,
mhm.
real world, real roles within a setting, as a real person would.
Mhm. And that also
Um,
applies to Common Core standards when you are writing for an authentic or presenting for an authentic audience.
mhm.
One thing that came up a few times was talking about responding to phenomenon. So that was the example that you brought up with the dinosaur, where there was a phenomenon, that dinosaur, and then that was used to generate questions. And it's getting more and more traction, I feel like, in science education. Like in NGSS, there's constantly using phenomenon to drive student questioning. I'm just wondering if you've seen that has it gone to your classrooms or your professional learning communities at all? Or is that something brand new?
You say using student experiences to drive
Oh,
student.
no, presenting a phenomenon to a student. So the example of the dinosaur in the rocks that the teacher gave in the book, that would be a phenomenon based. So you're presenting students with phenomenon and then asking them to explain it. Or like, why does metal get colder than like wool for an elementary school? And then the students use that to start asking questions. Is that something that you've seen a lot in your classes or been experienced with in different PDs? Or is that something that's just like very, at this point, like secondary science?
So I've heard of it, but like in my own classroom, it isn't something that I've made a regular habit of using. So like for me, when I read that, I'm like, this to me, it really spoke to me, because I thought, well, this is how I felt like this is how I should be starting, because it does open up a lot of the questioning for the students, right?
Right.
It's the experience right there. So, I mean, it's a shared experience is the way I've always thought about it, but it's something new that I want to make sure that I incorporate.
Yeah. And I think what the book was talking about, how problematic situations are worth investigating and how it can be fun. One of the element or characteristics of it being fascinating. And I think when we introduce concepts in that manner, it makes it fascinating because students find it fun to investigate. So for example, at our STEM night, the University of Chicago outreach program was there, and they did a demonstration of polymers and how when you move it, it hardens. When you move it fast, it hardens, but when you just keep it at a still state, it turns liquid. And so that's something that, for example, I would say, why do you think it does that? Unless you find out. Find some videos on it or in some articles on it, and then come back and let me know why it's doing that. They have some great videos out too that I saw. A matter of fact, one Saturday I was watching TV and they had a video about they filled up a whole pool with the polymers, and they show someone running across it. So if you run across it real fast, it stays solid.
Oh, I think I saw that.
When they stood on it, it's sunk down. And so, for students to look at something like that and then just say, why do you think that happens? They're already intrigued by it. So, I love what you said about that. I think that's a great reminder to me. Like you said, Tracy, I haven't been really doing that, but now that I think about it, I really want to start using that strategy.
Yeah.
To get students.
So easy to use too.
I'm sorry.
So
there's so many videos out there. It's so easy to find one on Edutopia or Discovery or whatever teacher or PBS, whatever teacher, let's say YouTube too, and find one that's going to be really engaging. It doesn't have to be long.
Right.
One advice I got at PD last year was to actually play the video but leave the sound off. So students actually have to start imagining what's going on and filling those blanks, and that's going to help drive those questions a lot more as well.
Oh, wow. I love that idea. That's a good tip.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
And then even playing some videos and saying, what do you think is happening? Or showing a picture. Like, what do you think, what's going on here? What phenomenon is happening here?
Yeah, or explaining it. Just a really, I'm sorry, Lou, you cut off for a second.
No, I was just saying, I'm thinking that's another way we
Yeah.
could have students thinking.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So that kind of leads into the next part where we talk about how do you create a classroom environment. But there's one more thing I want to hit on before we move on to the second chapter. Is if you look at the figure 1.1 on page 7, where it has that spectrum from teacher-directed inquiry all the way to student-directed inquiry.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm going to edit the video and put the image up there so people will know what we're talking about.
Okay.
Where do you feel like you are in your classroom?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe let's rephrase. Where are you right now, and where would you like to be come end the semester in January?
Okay. I feel like, because I work in the STEM lab, so what I'm seeing is students are kind of taking the leap, and we introduced this year to them saying, we always introduce this to our students, that we are facilitators, that we're not going to direct them with everything. So they already know they're going to have to really problem solve on their own. We're going to kind of give them some room to explore and try to problem solve on their own. So I kind of feel like I'm in the second one where it says teacher-student shared inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of share it. Yeah, students, it says shared teacher-student control of inquiry, shared decision-making with alternative inquiry. So yeah, I'm about in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah, and I am just starting to make that leap from teacher-directed, mainly because, again, I'm doing a lot of modeling. And I'm just like, as of this week, heading into teacher-student shared. So they're starting to look at some of their ideas that they've had, some of their questions that they've had, and look at the type of questions that they've had. And yeah, so we're just stepping into that part. And yeah, I hope to be in the far end, student-directed, by...
And this reminds me of a inquiry PD that I took with IMSA a few years back, and we went through this. They had stations set up where one was teacher directed, where it was the same activity, but you had more directions on the table, like all the directions, and then you had some directions, and then you had hardly no directions.
Oh.
So it really kind of did just the spectrum. That's this teacher problem-based learning spectrum of strategies. And you can really see how you can scaffolds the students' directions, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And amazing how many things you can put together without reading the directions.
Right.
That's true, because it forces them to think. It really does force them to think and be creative too. And then what this is telling me, because with my Tinkertail, with my Imagine It project with dance and teaching science and math through dance, I'm glad that I have this. This book is so helpful because it can tell me, I can do this. I can say, okay, prepare them, but then let them go and be student directed. Just explore this math concept through dance. And I don't have to tell them, create an octagon shape, on the floor or with your bodies or whatever. No.
So Lou,
shapes.
Then I have a question for you. So like heading into our chapter 2, right? In the designing the invitational environment, do you think that your students are risk takers right now, comfortable taking risks in the environment that you've set up?
That's a good question. Some of them, I think they are a little bit. They're not quite there because, first of all, I haven't started the dance program yet. I start in about a week. But the students that I'll have in my dance program, I have in my STEM lab. So they're a little bit familiar with me. Some of them I had last year in my dance program, so they're familiar with me and dance. So that said, I think they're about midway comfortable. I can see if they were brand new students, I don't think they would probably be as comfortable. But they're really learning a lot more about STEM, and they're really most of them know me. So that said, they may be more easygoing, more comfortable with trying.
How about you, Michael?
I wish I would have read this book before school started. I've been diving into more student-directed. So my environmental science students who are seniors are doing 20% projects this year. So first round, they had 6 weeks to work on their project, and then we're just going to get it a little bit longer each time. And I just assumed that they would love the freedom and just like dive into it and be on board. And it's not been the case.
Say more about that. What do you mean?
Yeah, and I mean, this actually goes into like our final question. We're talking about how do you create an environment that's really supportive of this type of learning. So, I did a lot of work with students trying to identify what they're passionate about. They're, ready to go. I think I missed the modeling part that we talked about earlier. And there's just been weird pushback about it. Like, I don't want to do this project. This project's lame. I'm like, well, you chose this project. I think that, you're getting frustrated because you're hitting that part where you're hitting that, you're in the cloud, going back to the video that we watched over the summer, where you're trying to wrap your head around all this at a comfortable point. And I didn't really think about how to best support students through that cloud process. So like I'm learning a lot, and I'm also getting pushback from the high achievers that are in my class. So those students that are, like the top 4 or 5 kids in out of the top 10 are in my class, and they hate this process. And the point on it too, where it's like your high achievers are going to have problems with this format because it does not involve guess what's on the teacher's mind and what's going to be on the test.
Right.
You have to draw that knowledge from yourself. And it's led to a lot of interesting conversations with the students.
So I wonder if one of the things that they talk about in the second chapter is keeping an inquiry journal. I wonder if there's something that you can think about, because it says teachers keeping an inquiry journal, so this makes me think that not just the teacher keeping an inquiry journal, but also the students.
Yeah.
Right.
Get them to think about, why don't you want to do this? Maybe give them some prompts to answer and write about, and, really reflect on what is it about this project that you don't want to do other than just being lazy or
they are seniors, so.
Too hard, or like what's really stopping you from doing it? You might want to have them keep a journal.
Yeah, and I knew.
And so that's the reflection part, though, right? I mean, reflection.
And this is keep an inquiry journal.
But I'm saying you can reflect in the inquiry journal
For the student.
Yeah, again, that's why I said, like, I wish I would have read this before, because just when you're trying something new, it's going to crash and burn in parts, and it's just how you're going to learn and make it better for the next time around. So what have you guys done already this year to create an environment that's going to set the stage for these inquiry projects?
I'm really looking at establishing, or I think I've done a good job of establishing a learning environment where they respect each other and their ideas. So we've been dabbling with coming up with questions. And then I'm really working on just their communication between each other in terms of listening and responding, and, just basic communication, adding on to what somebody said. asking more questions. So that part I've got, and the teacher modeling, how we do different investigations, that I've got down. But like I said, now we're getting to the point where I want them to start taking a little bit of lead in designing the different problems or investigations. Right now we're doing a lot of investigations, so we're still getting ready to put together an inquiry journal for all of the students. They're all going to have their own inquiry journals, so they've got a page of questions already and problems in the community, and that's about as far as we are. I'm trying to take it really, really slow. So I would say I've got a good environment for people respecting each other and listening to each other. And now we need to go to like the next step. Right. So working together, collaborating.
Okay. What I've been doing is, when students come to the STEM lab, they are not allowed to work individually. Each station has 2 chairs, so you have to work with someone.
I like that.
Of course, yeah, of course. The thing about the STEM lab is it's there to prepare students for the 21st century. And part of working is you have to work with people. So they're learning social skills and work skills in which they have to learn to work with people that they don't necessarily like. And so, we really haven't, once we started the year explaining that this is the expectation, we really haven't had a whole lot of pushback from the students. Not to say we haven't had any, because we have, but we make them think, we make them sit down and talk to each other about, this is your job. You have to get this job done. So anyway, teamwork has been a big idea in my STEM lab. And so that said, we've used Kagan strategies like think, pair, share, hand up, stand up. What is it? Hand up, stand up, pair up, for them to talk about a topic, just to get to know each other and break the ice. So those types of things. And then once they're finished working on a project, first of all, they have to work on the one project together. So they're using the Google Drive and the Google Classroom to kind of share documents with each other. If one person is not there, the other person can access it because it's in the drive. So they're sharing things. So teamwork, sharing work, using e-portfolios to reflect on their work together. They're both responsible for it. And then using exit slips to talk about what they learned together, how they can apply what they learned. How does this relate to a real world career? So those are the things that I've been trying to do to kind of get students to, work well together. And I think that was your question. Work well together?
Or to make them more open to inquiry. So I think everything you said definitely has they have the organization, they have the teamwork skills.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess my main thing has been trying to take the emphasis off of me as the giver of knowledge and, taking on more of that facilitator role. And just working with the students about, you can do this. There's no right or wrong answer to these questions, and really having open-ended projects to start generating that in the hopes that will carry over to the 20% projects. But now, from reading this book and speaking with you guys, I know that my next step really has to be to go back and do some more of that modeling and using those metacognitive question stems to walk them through an inquiry process myself, so that they have that to draw upon when they go through their own.
And one more thing, the other thing that I do is I use a 3 before me rule. So if you have a problem, if they're stuck, they have to find 3 ways to solve their problems before they can ask me or the other STEM specialist. So they can Google it or use the menu, or they can ask a peer who may already know how to do it. So they have to be able to problem solve. So that's definitely one way that I think, one strategy that is preparing them for PBL.
Right. That's great. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for the hangout.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Looking forward to see everyone again in December.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Can't wait.
Have a good night.
Talking to you all. Good night.
All right. Bye.
Bye.